Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 10:14, and we were due to commence this morning's proceedings at 10, so I do apologize for the 14-minute delay in start time. By way of introduction, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nicole Morris, and I am your program director this morning. Kindly note the following house rules. May I humbly request that you turn your phones onto silent mode. Sometimes if it vibrates, it is a bit of a challenge. So if you could just turn it onto silent with no vibration, that would be appreciated, please. I know many of you will take pictures, etc. You're welcome to do so, but please just make sure that it does not obstruct the view of the person seated either behind you or next to you. Please familiarize yourself with the emergency exits in case of an unlikely emergency. You would have also noted that we've got Campus Protection Service personnel throughout the venue to assist you in the unlikely event of an emergency. The lavatories are located on the first floor, and our bathrooms are demarcated for males and females, as well as for persons living with disabilities. Should you be unsure as to where the first floor is, kindly please ask one of the ushers who are dressed in these lovely white, red, and blue, that's rock art on that t-shirt here, on the golf shirt. You can humbly ask them for assistance. And I humbly request that you remain seated throughout this morning's dialogue. Now that the house rules have been outlined, I certainly hope that you will enjoy this morning's dialogue. I ask that you please lean in and take in every nugget that will be dropped here this morning, every life lesson, every pearl of wisdom, but also reflect on the questions that will be posed here this morning by both speakers as well as you, the audience, who will have an opportunity to engage with the panel. I would like to formally welcome you to today's Human Rights Dialogue. It is indeed an honor and a privilege. In observing protocol and recognizing our distinguished guests who are present here this morning, kindly please allow me to acknowledge our keynote speaker, Dr. Naledi Pandor, our keynote speaker, Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies, VC Designate, Professor Deborah Meyer, members of the panel, Dr. Gumede, who you know very well, the SRC President, MX Oliphant, representatives from all spheres of government, our partner this morning, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, the Student Representative Council, support staff present, academic staff present, members from the community, members of the media, students present, and all staff present here this morning. You are all welcome. Now, before I call upon our VC Designate to officially open and welcome this morning's Human Rights Dialogue, aptly themed Leadership, Governance, and the Protection of Human Rights in a Democratic Society, I would like to request that the choir please open this morning's proceedings, and I'd humbly request that we all please stand for the singing of the national anthem. Stand if you're able to do so. If you're more comfortable seated, that's perfectly fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Thank you very much to the SBU Choir. In formally opening this morning's Human Rights Dialogue, I would like to humbly welcome our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Postgraduate Studies, Professor Deborah Meyer, to the podium to formally welcome and open this morning's event.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being patient with us, but you'll notice that we will catch up with our program. So thank you for your patience. It is an absolute honor for me, a very great honor to welcome our keynote speakers, Dr. Naledi Pandor, former minister and current chairperson of Nelson Mandela Foundation, and Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, founder and executive trustee of the Steve Biko Foundation. Welcome to Sol Plaatje University, and thank you very much for your time and willingness to lead the debate around leadership, governance, and protection of human rights in a democratic society. I also want to welcome members of the executive and senior management team of Sol Plaatje University, representatives of the Office of the Premier of the Northern Cape, representatives of the Department of Arts and Culture, staff and students of Sol Plaatje University, members of the Student Representative Council, panel members, Dr. Gumede and MX Olifant, guests present in the room and attending online, welcome, and we look forward to your participation in the discussion. In case I've left out anyone, I want to say all protocol observed. To start with, I want to give you a brief introduction to Sol Plaatje University and where we are at the moment. Today, as all of you will be aware, we remember and honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for a free and democratic society, specifically the 69 men, women, and children who perished in the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. We must never forget their sacrifice, because their sacrifice paved the way for the rights and freedoms we enjoy today, and it is our responsibility to honor their legacy by ensuring that human rights and our very progressive constitution remain at the core of our democracy. We honor the memory of those who died at Sharpeville, and we have the joy of doing so from Sol Plaatje University, one of only 2 post-apartheid universities in the country. Sol Plaatje University was established more than 10 years ago, unencumbered by descriptors such as previously disadvantaged, historically white, or Bush University. In other words, in its academic engagements, Sol Plaatje University can be judged on how it acknowledges and responds to the social damage of apartheid without asking to be excused because of that brutish past. This year, Sol Plaatje University embarks on a 3rd strategic cycle in which the emphasis will be on changing lives and enabling brighter futures for our students, our staff, and stakeholders. Specifically, Sol Plaatje University's institution-wide focus in the next 5 years will be directed towards the development and advancement of a new generation of students who are academically proficient, socially conscious, environmentally responsible, economically enabled, and technologically empowered. The first 2 decades of existence of this university was focused on establishing a university. Now we focus on managed growth, expanding our academic offerings, expanding our research footprint, and our service to the Northern Cape. Our existing 4 faculties will expand offerings that contribute to the local industries of the Northern Cape by bringing in geology, expanding on our agricultural offering, and strengthening our focus on alternative energy research. We will, in the next 5 years, also introduce a 5th faculty, Faculty of Health Science, with offerings in nursing, physiotherapy, and emergency medicine. As an anchor institution, all our plans are aimed at contributing to the development of the Northern Cape. The SPU division hosting today's discussion is the Division of Student Affairs, DSA for short, and the division developed a new strategy in line with the new strategy of the institution, and it is centered around a vision to be student-centric and student-engaged. DSA is committed to student centricity, which it promotes through active student engagement. They promote a student culture that is inclusive and diverse and underpinned by the principle of an ethic of care that promotes social justice. Their second strategic goal is to contribute to student success through student-centered engagements and proactive citizenship. At the heart of student centricity is the SPU Student Success Strategy. This institutional strategy not only enhances students' academic success, but it propels the ethic of care and fosters student engagement and involvement. This approach views students as active participants in their own academic and personal growth, integrating academic, social, professional, and cultural experiences. Given these strategic goals and the importance of assisting our students in joining the national debate, coupled with the importance of commemorating our shared history, explains the reason for today's discussion. I urge you to actively listen to our keynote speakers and participate in the subsequent discussions so that it enriches your experience and ensures your contribution to relevant discourse in our country. SPU as a higher education institution challenges you to use this debate as another opportunity to learn. Let us continuously educate ourselves about our rights, but also our responsibilities. Commemorating Human Rights Day is not just about remembering the past. It is also about shaping the future. It is about building a South Africa where every South African is valued, where freedom and equality for all are not just ideals, but realities. I close with the words of the Honorable former President Nelson Mandela, who said, "To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity." Let us never allow complacency to erode the hard-won victories of the past. Instead, let us walk together, determined to create a nation where every person is free and valued. I thank you.
Thank you very much, DVC, for that warm welcome. I do believe that everyone in the room now feels welcome and is ready to have fun with us this morning and lean into what I think is a treat on Human Rights Day. In keeping with the atmosphere of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's welcome address, I would like to formally introduce once again the Sol Plaatje University in serenading us once again, and let's welcome them to sing Si Sondela Kuwe Ngonyama. I'm not too sure, but it's going to make sure, so. Thank you very, very much. I think we're all just a little bit warmer. This morning's Human Rights Dialogue seeks to create a platform for thought leaders, professionals, and community to reflect and participate in the creation of what we believe this morning to be a transformative conversation. I've got the honor and privilege this morning of introducing a phenomenal human being. Dr. Grace Naledi Pandor is a distinguished South African politician, educator, and academic renowned for her contributions to education, governance, and international relations. Born on the 7th of December 1953 in Durban, South Africa, she hails from a lineage of intellectual and political figures. Her father, Joe Matthews, was a prominent anti-apartheid activist, and her grandfather, Z.K. Matthews, was one of South Africa's foremost scholars. Due to her family's political activism, Dr. Pandor spent much of her early life in exile, completing her secondary education at Gaborone Secondary School in Botswana. She pursued higher education with a strong commitment to academic excellence, earning the following: a Bachelor of Arts in History and English from the University of Botswana, a Master's in Education from the University of London, a Master's in General Linguistics from Stellenbosch University, a PhD in Education from the University of Pretoria. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Pandor began her professional career in education, teaching English in London and Botswana before joining the University of Bophuthatswana and later the University of Cape Town as a senior lecturer. She also played a leadership role in various educational trusts and committees, advocating for educational equity and transformation. Her academic contributions were further recognized when she was recently awarded an honorary professorship at Stellenbosch University in 2024 for her outstanding leadership in education, science, and public policy. In 1994, Dr. Pandor entered South African politics, making the beginning of an influential career in governance. She was elected a member of parliament and rose to the following leadership positions: Deputy Chief Whip of the African National Congress, Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, and the very first woman to hold this position. Over the years, she has held several key ministerial positions, driving policy reforms and innovation. Minister of Education, where Dr. Pandor led significant reforms in South Africa's education sector, addressing challenges in outcomes-based education. Minister of Science and Technology for 2 terms, where Dr. Pandor spearheaded South Africa's successful bid to host the Square Kilometre Array, yes, in this very province, advancing the country's position in global science research. In 2012, as Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Pandor implemented major reforms to improve service delivery and administrative efficiency. In 2018, as the Minister of Higher Education and Training, focused on expanding access to tertiary education and institutional transformation. In 2019, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, where Dr. Pandor strengthened South Africa's global partnerships, diplomacy, and international engagements. Beyond government, Dr. Pandor continues to champion social justice, education, and human rights. In October 2024, she was appointed chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, becoming the 3rd person to hold this prestigious role since the foundation's establishment in 1999. On the 6th of March 2025, Dr. Pandor was appointed as honorary professor in education from the University of Pretoria because of the impact in education, policy, and innovation, and because of her unwavering commitment to advancing higher education and sustainable development which aligns perfectly with the institution's mission. Dr. Pandor's unwavering commitment to education and governance and international diplomacy has made her a respected leader in South Africa and beyond. Her legacy continues to shape policy that promotes equity, innovation, and the protection of human rights in an ever-evolving global landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming our first keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Pandor, to the podium.
Thank you very much to the Dean for that kind introduction, very generous. I've come to hold the belief that perhaps it's better to read about the person after they've spoken so that the audience can say what a useless speaker she was, or she truly deserved to be here because she spoke well. If you hear about the person before they speak and then they're lousy, you just wonder what kind of institutions the person went to. So I really thank the Dean for that kind introduction. Allow me then to begin by greeting you all. Good morning. Dumelang. Goeiemorgen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So it's such a wonderful pleasure to be here. Incoming Vice Chancellor, Mayor, it's lovely to be with you today. Deputy Vice Chancellor, members of the academic and administrative staff, Mr. Nkosinati Biko, student leaders and students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I greet you all on our Human Rights Day. As many of you know, this day celebrates our democracy's embrace of human rights and commemorates the selfless, courageous struggles of the oppressed in South Africa. The specific commemoration, as the incoming Vice Chancellor said, is of those who sacrificed their lives in the massacre of Sharpeville in Johannesburg, those who died in Langa, Cape Town, and in many other places in which women, men, and children rose up to resist the inhumane apartheid laws of racist civil registration through pass laws. Those who bravely confronted apartheid forces on that day in 1960 showed leadership and bold courage by standing up to defend the rights of all persons. Leadership, I believe, derives from what one is prepared to do to advance the positive interests of others. Leadership is not about a position. It is about contribution. The heroic actions of those who confronted the evil of apartheid, from Chief Makanda to Sharpeville heroes, to those of Soweto 1976, to Steve Biko, to Nelson Mandela, to Solomon Mahlangu, to Winnie Madikizela Mandela, to Ruth First, to Clemens Kadali, to Neville Alexander, and thousands others have contributed to shaping the human rights laws of post-apartheid South Africa. I believe it is important that we continue to reference apartheid in our discourse, as it is intellectually critical to be alert to the influences of apartheid on our ideological posture and our philosophical ambitions. As you well know, apartheid was a vicious policy of racist social engineering that sought to dehumanize Black people in South Africa for purposes of socio-economic domination. Our human rights framework is set out in the Bill of Rights chapter of our Constitution. It provides the rights of all South Africans and residents in our country. Often, we think the rights in the Constitution protect only us as citizens of South Africa, but they protect all residents in South Africa. Because we're not a country that says, I treat you well because you're South African, and then I treat you badly because you're non-South African. Our Constitution applies in the main to all who dwell in our country. And it's an important reminder for all of us to have attention to that. If we absorbed and recognized this aspect, there'd be far less tension between ourselves and our brothers and sisters from the rest of the African continent, and we would not be labeled, as we are sometimes, as xenophobic. The rights that we all enjoy include civil, political, and socio-economic rights, as well as what are called third-generation rights relating to environment sustainability. Our Constitution is rather unusual in comparison to others because as one of the countries that became free very late into the 20th century, we could appropriate lessons from other democracies and incorporate very modern clauses and provisions in our Constitution, which you often don't find in many other older constitutions. So we have benefited from the advance of history and politics, unlike many older democracies that lag behind our own framework. Our Constitution drew on our Freedom Charter as a source for democratic human rights. This is why in our Constitution you will find that equality, the rights to privacy, and the rights to development feature so prominently. In addition to these rights, our national policies are also built on our foundational Constitution. We today are confronted as South Africa by active threats to our sovereign right to implement our freely determined foreign policy. The most powerful country in the world is angered at South Africa's insistence that foreign policy should be guided by national interest, certainly, but national interest conjoined with progressive human rights values and principles. The Freedom Charter that was adopted by the Congress of the People in 1955 included very progressive and forward-looking clauses on the subject of international relations. Our policy focus is that all nations should seek to achieve and promote cooperation through peaceful means and not coercion. We have upheld this policy in our peacemaking role in Burundi, in support for Democratic Republic of Congo negotiations for peace, and in the assistance to negotiations that we gave to Ethiopia's federal government in its negotiations with the administration of Tigray, following the conflict that broke out between the federal government of Ethiopia and the administration of Tigray. You all know that we are living in a very testing time geopolitically. Many analysts suggest this is a very toxic set of crises, making foreign relations a deeply stressed domain. Contributors to a recent Mapungubwe Institute publication titled Africa and the World suggest that the unipolar dominance of the past 40 years is being disrupted by a crude, more vicious geo-economic dominance. The intention, they assert, is to enforce compliance on vulnerable states to the dictates of United States foreign policy preferences. And this results from the world striving increasingly to create multipolarity. And so those who have enjoyed a very powerful role in influencing others to adopt their policy direction, when they see a shift away from a unipolarity, they become extremely vicious in response. And this is part of what South Africa is experiencing today. We as South Africa have generally pursued an independent foreign policy unencumbered by the preferences of other countries. In the past decade, we have seen a growing impatience toward South Africa's independence in foreign relations. This has stretched from concern at our trade relations with China, which is now our largest trading partner, to concern about South Africa's solidarity with Cuba and with Palestine and their struggle for freedom. Our direct action as a country of challenging Israel's war in Gaza has caused significant displeasure among the friends of Israel. South Africa's use of international law and its well-argued representation on the matter of genocide are outstanding examples of leadership and courage in today's difficult environment. An outstanding illustration of a country holding on to the highest set of values and principles which dictate that human rights apply to all and not to some. This is our country's belief, and I hope you as the young people share that belief and will continue to uphold it. The case that we brought to the International Court of Justice has caused, as you might imagine, great nervousness that other leaders may be found complicit in genocide and may themselves be summoned by the International Court of Justice. Because if you are complicit in genocide, you have to face the court as well. The United States of America targeting of aid to South Africa and action against our ambassador illustrates the distress caused by South Africa's principled stand. Our country has shown leadership in encouraging peaceful resolution of the Middle East crisis and in challenging the impunity enjoyed by Israel for over 70 years. It is interesting when we observe concern about Israel, it is often from the most powerful in the West, a claim that Israel has a right to defend itself. There's very little reference to the fact that the Palestinian people's territory is occupied and that they do not enjoy the human rights that we dearly love. So it's vital whenever we look at an issue that you look at the full facts that are associated with an international issue of concern and of human rights. We haven't neglected, in the course of all these events, our national interest. We have pursued our national interest through successful levels, through trade agreements, through our membership and benefits for our workers and businesses, through AGOA, and through trade that we've developed increasingly with new trade partners such as China and East Asia. Some commentators attempt to create an impression that South Africa's government is only pursuing the interests of those who are oppressed elsewhere, and that it is not looking to the national interests of South Africa. If you read reports on our trade in the last 30 years, you would realize we occupy a very different space economically from where we were in 1994. So it is absolutely untrue that national interest doesn't matter. But it is also a fallacy to believe that you should neglect human rights of others or even your own solely for pursuing national interest. That places you in a hazardous road of breach of human rights, which we would not like to be part of. So leadership, if you are South Africa, is not easy. The election of 2024 confirmed this complexity. The parties in the election had no choice following how you voted. They had no choice but to form a multi-party government. There was no other way. Otherwise, what you would have had would be a situation in which every matter would become a subject of negotiation and you would have a dysfunctional government and parliament. So you had to find a way of ensuring that you enjoyed a majority that would allow you to continue to act on the basis of our national policies. Thus far, this so-called GNU has held together. And I think we, as citizens of South Africa, have to find ways of ensuring that all our people understand why we have a multi-party government, how it works, and ensure as well that we educate our citizens about the matters I have referred to, the value of international solidarity, and the urgent need to firmly support our country and our government in maintaining an independent foreign policy. I don't know whether you would like to be told by the United States of America who your friends should be, what your policy should be, or how you conduct your affairs. I prefer a different country. Leadership, of course, which is a subject I was asked to speak to as well, requires implementation efficiency in the area of governance and competent public institutions to ensure that all people benefit from a human rights-oriented legal system. So it's insufficient to just have a statutory framework without competent execution, persons with capacity, and devoted attention from public institutions to ensure enjoyment of human rights. While our country has a very progressive framework and key institutions, such as an independent judiciary and institutions promoting democracy, our public sector has been somewhat woefully inept at ensuring full enjoyment of human rights. Some of our public servants and public representatives have not paid sufficient attention to implementation and have failed to draw on our universities and our think tanks to help them resolve failures. Good governance implies efficient and approved use of public resources. It implies responsiveness, and it implies constant monitoring and evaluation of the progress of key priorities. Having said that, it must be acknowledged that our country has recorded laudable progress in the first 30 years of democracy. Advances are evident in areas of science and innovation, in broadened digital access, in improving access to basic education, improving access to post-secondary education and postgraduate education. I believe our biggest fault line is our weak economy, our growing debt levels, and low employment and entrepreneurship in our country. It is my view that our universities could become important sources of solutions if more attention is given to utilizing them to investigate the causes of failures and the plausibility of solutions from research. We have not made use of the inherent value in universities as knowledge-generating institutions. And I believe this university could set new trends by devoting attention to helping the Northern Cape achieve growth, achieve modern technological advancement, and utilize science-based innovation for development. I believe greater attention to these opportunities would begin to translate our ambitious human rights agenda into practical reality for all in South Africa. And I think as South Africa develops, this would empower and benefit the entire continent of Africa. Our country has done well in incorporating modern aspirations in its Bill of Rights and its Constitution. Leadership and good governance mean that we should pursue full implementation of the aspirations of our country. If we don't work harder at ensuring full implementation and full enjoyment of our human rights and constitutional framework, people will begin to lose faith in them, and then we will result in a society that will not uphold the values and principles that are so important for our progress. If we don't ensure that our democracy is inclusive, that our democracy is sustainable, that our democratic institutions function maximally, our people will lose faith in democracy and would then lead us into a situation where authoritarianism and dictatorship hold sway. If we do not address the issues of safety and security, our people will move toward greater vigilantism, which is a danger for our society, and we will lose the value of the protections that we have enshrined in our Constitution. So if indeed we are to ensure that we have leadership, that we have good governance, and that we protect our human rights in our democratic society, let us make sure that our institutions are competent, they're efficient, and they are led by individuals who know how to execute their mandate. I hope that I haven't disappointed you given the reading of my CV, and I thank you for having come to this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Another warm round of applause. Dr. Pandor, you definitely did not disappoint. In fact, I think we all left with a glass a little fuller than what it was when we first arrived this morning. I think you've inspired, you've reinvigorated hope, and you've reminded us all about the importance of one, the journey we've walked on, where we find ourselves today, but also I think for the young people in the room, you've given them a mandate, you've given them a task. There's a call to order here, if you did not pick it up. And the call to order is you need to not only get your degree, but you need to ask yourself, how do you become a responsible, an efficient, and an effective role player in shaping what our South Africa looks like? You have an important role to play in preserving our democracy. You've got an important role to play in protecting the rights that have been enshrined in our Constitution. We speak our Constitution, but it's important that you protect it, you safeguard it, and you ensure that you become the call to action that Dr. Pandor's asked you to be today, the leaders that can implement, the leaders that can act, and the leaders that in fact will evoke and safeguard. One, evoke change, but safeguard our democracy. So with that being said, thank you, Dr. Pandor. I am now going to hand over, though, this role of being your facilitator this morning to Mr. Mnyaka. So, Mr. Mnyaka, without further ado, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Dean. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Nkosinathi Biko. Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, born in May 1971 in Port Elizabeth, now known as Gqeberha, South Africa, is a distinguished leader committed to preserving and advancing the legacy of his father, renowned anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko. As a champion of human rights, social justice, and community empowerment, he has played a pivotal role in fostering national dialogue on equality, heritage, and governance. Raised in a family deeply engaged in struggle against apartheid, Mr. Biko inherited a profound sense of responsibility for social change. His mother, Nontsikelelo Ntsiki Mashalaba, a dedicatedness and community activist, instilled in him the values of resilience, education, and service. Together with the co-founded the Steve Biko Foundation, an institute dedicated to promoting the ideas of Black consciousness movement and advancing socio-economic development. As the founder and the executive trustee of the Steve Biko Foundation, Mr. Biko has held initiatives that emphasize community development, education, and cultural preservation. Under his leadership, the Steve Biko Center in Ginsberg was established, serving as a hub for cultural and economic revitalization. His work in preserving the legacy of Steve Biko has positioned the foundation as a key driver of thought leadership and social transformation in South Africa. Beyond the foundation, Mr. Biko has contributed significantly to the corporate sector, currently serving as the chairperson of the Oligoli South African Pty Limited. His strategic leadership is one of the country's leading marketing and public relations firms, underscore his commitment to ethical business practices and inclusive economic growth. A sought-after public speaker, a writer, Mr. Biko actively engages in discussions on human rights, governance, and the future of South Africa. Through his work, he continues to highlight the relevance of his father's philosophy in addressing contemporary challenges such as inequality, youth empowerment, and national identity. His presence at the Leadership and Governance Dialogue is a testament to his long life dedication to advancing human dignity, self-reliance, and social justice. By reflecting on the legacy of Steve Biko and the continuation of human rights advocacy, Mr. Biko will provide critical insight into the role of leadership in shaping a more just and equitable society. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Nkosinathi Steve Biko to the stage.
at my age, you never know whether you are going to need reading glasses or not. I think the light is just about good enough. DVC and VC designate, Professor Mayer, our honored speaker, Professor Naledi Pandor, all of the members of council, all of the members of the Student Representative Council present here, the SRC president, faculty, staff, students. Good morning, comrades. Are there any fighters here? Good morning, fighters. Molweni Towers, Izwelethu Ma-Africa. You will recognize these, of course, as greetings in the various political formations. I'm not familiar with the DA, of course. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Goeiemorgen to the people that speak Afrikaans. Ek het Afrikaans met 'n A geslag. I think Gayton would have said within his party, "Awe." And I'm not educated on this new lot of people that have been evicted by the Solidarity movement as well as AfriForum. Let us call them the Afrikaner Americans. I don't know whether they have caucused on this matter and whether they are going to go with what African Americans say, which is what's up, or follow the fellows who are down south in the US and say howdy. We'll wait and see when they come back. DVC, I'm honored by this invitation. Our national calendar marks today as Human Rights Day, and I was asked to reflect on the intersection of Biko's legacy with the question of human rights. And the minute I accepted the invitation, I confronted this caution that was raised by Professor Njabulo Ndebele at the first Biko Memorial Lecture in the year 2000, what to do with a blank page. So the method he uses in responding to that question is one for which I'm indebted. He simply follows the evolution of his ideas in filling that page. The second inspiration is from a refreshing interview given by Nduduzo Makatini, the great jazz artist, when he had a conversation with Clement Manyathela on Radio 702 recently. And in this conversation, one of the callers, I think his name was Fela Nation, called to ask whether or not Nduduzo believes that the piano needs more keys. And this comes from a debate about the work of American pianist Thelonious Monk, who was deemed to be someone whose technique and distinctive style reflects poor pianism. This is what the people who criticize Monk were saying. And so inspired by this, I framed my remarks, the hollow sound of human rights. The piano needs more keys. Shortly after the invitation, then, I visited the Steve Biko Center, which was referenced here. I had the opportunity to develop this center, and we opened it in 2012. It was one of the national legacy projects. They are deemed so by cabinet, and it was under the cabinet of President Thabo Mbeki that we were able to build it with public funding. Professor Pandor would have been a member of that cabinet, serving as a Minister of Science and Technology at the time. Of the many offerings of the center is a museum. I don't want to get into the detail of it, but in the museum is an exhibition titled Biko, A Quest for a True Humanity. And as I was conducting my inspections at the museum, it dawned on me that, in fact, we had commissioned this exhibition in the year 2007. It was actually commissioned by the Department of Education. And the Minister of Education at the time was Dr. Pandor. So thank you once more, ma'am. And I walk through this exhibition. The first section of the exhibition is like a preamble to Biko's own legacy. And so it invokes voices of people who are in his tradition and that have helped contribute to our struggle. So in it, you will see from afar voices like Marcus Garvey, W.E. Du Bois, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture. And from the Caribbean, you will see voices like Frantz Fanon, Amy Cizé, Leopold Senghor, amongst others. From the continent, we beckon voices like Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, and at home, Dio Soga, Charlotte Maxeke, Langalbalele Dube, Lembede, and Herbert Lom. Sol Plaatje holds a distinctive place in this exhibition as founder, of course, of the South African Native National Congress, which gave birth to the ANC. That section is like what we call in Isintu ukupapata. When we act in deference to those who come before us, especially people of senior authority. At times, these leaders had conversations, whether intellectually or in person. And one of the conversations that would have happened, we are reminded, is that Sol Plaatje, in fact, visited the United States where he met with Marcus Garvey and where he met with W.E. Du Bois. Marcus Garvey was at the time the president of the African Negro Improvement Association, and Du Bois the president of the NAACP. This was prior to the establishment of the African National Congress. So it's not romanticism that they sit there. There are these cross-pollinations that we must recognize. But one of the most outstanding on this list is, of course, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, and a person today worthy of a standing ovation. He is really a man whose rightful place in history he has yet to occupy, and I think we have to do better at elevating the place of Sobukwe in history. I'm delighted to be here because I know he spent time in this town, and of course, we know that like he lived here. Sobukwe spent the period where he was under house arrest here in Kalishiwe, as you will know. Now, Sobukwe and Biko are bound by a political tradition in which one cannot imagine human rights as delinked from humanity. We remember this day really as Sharpeville Day. Human Rights Day is built on the ashes of what we called Sharpeville Day, right? And we remember it for the act of burning the dome passes that people carried. But Sobukwe was trying to teach us that this is a matter that is much more profound. As an Africanist, he is rumored to have been very thorough at exploring the human experience. So neighbors from Kalishiwe will talk about how he used to acknowledge people. And of course, at times as a banned person, he was restricted from interacting with them. In any event, he did believe that when you don't have time, you don't ask an African how they are doing, right? Because the act of greeting someone in the African tradition is not a superficial exchange of pleasantries. It's a very immersive encounter. It takes the inquirer on a journey into the depths of what's up in the life of the other person. And so when we greet people, we must be accessible for an authentic conversation, he is said to have believed. We must be able to give and to receive an account of one's wellness that draws from what is happening in every part of their lives, the field, the cattle, the work, the family, who was born, who died, who got married, the rain and the sun, and of course, whether there was too much or too little of it. All of these are things that stack up to define a person's wellness. So in a way, what Sobukwe was teaching us is that the dompas that we carried officiates over our very unhealthy condition. Under apartheid, it was a record of power that the regime wielded over us. It was a symbol of oppression. And by carrying it in our person, we were complicit in the ultimate act of self-betrayal. And when we presented it to an official or a person who claimed I demand it because I'm white, in a way, we were yielding our dignity, right? And on the basis of it, they were affirming their superiority. So through this document, and of course the laws that sat behind this document, the past laws, the regime controlled our paths to wellness. They decided on our behalf which areas we could access of the land, which areas we could own, what terms we could live on that land, what pastures we could till. If we were off the land, they would decide what job we could hold, who we could marry, and with whom it was morally reprehensible to snuggle. They stripped the identities of our children, endorsing new names in this document simply because those names flowed easier on their tongues than those their parents intentionally gave them at birth. They decided the quality of our children's education, and through this, of course, managed and diminished their life chances. Now, Ndebele, in the first Biko lecture, reminds us that at the height of this arrogance, Afrikanerdom became entitled to air, to water, to land, to sea, and to each and every black body. So Sobukwe was opening our eyes to the source of ailment. He reminded us that we cannot claim to be a healthy people amidst this myriad of infringements of our human rights. And he suggested to us that our path to healing begins with having control over the land and control of what we till, where we live, protecting Africa's children, their rights to express love, freeing her waters, the seas, and thus each and every black body. Biko comes on to then the political scene against this backdrop. And by the time that he assumes the role of member of the SRC at the University of Natal, albeit in the black section in 1966, the situation is worse. After the imprisonment of Sobukwe and the banning of the ANC and the PAC, not only were black people carrying passes, they were no longer accounting for their own welfare. The oppressed had considered their voice. We had considered our voice under the guise of multiracialism. And the liberal establishment in the form of organizations like NUSAS, despite being de-linked from the lived experience of black people, was accounting for our well-being. And to paraphrase Biko, it's like being kicked and being told how to respond to that kick. As I have tried to do with the case of Sobukwe, I want to explain Biko perhaps in simple terms, not political, bombastic terms. And this is because the BC movement was not limited to its political forms or the pontification, the isms and so forth. Yes, it started as a political formation, but it became what Biko called a way of life, a movement whose emphasis was more on agency than what form represented it. It began as a student organization called SASO, gave birth to a national organization called the BPC, and then later on, the Black Community Programs, And it is through the Black community programs that they translated these ideas into real, practical examples in society. So they did community clinics, scholarships, community self-employment projects, publications such as Black Review, and so forth. And by the end of his life, the time he dies, a myriad of organizations are banned, well beyond the 3. In fact, there were about 17 youth organizations, women's organizations, unions, journalists, and so forth, right? And philosophically, this entire movement had responded to Sobukwe's diagnosis of an ill society by prescribing self-mitigation through self-reliance. In a way, it was a movement that was seizing back the voice of the oppressed in order to improve the story of their well-being. The common praxis for all of these organizations, and I didn't go through the list, is, as Biko put it, that Black consciousness takes cognizance of the deliberateness of God's plan in creating Black people Black. Indeed, the African conception of humanity, which informs Biko, is that it is intrinsic in us by virtue of being born. Humanity, that is intrinsic in us by virtue of being born. In this respect, it is an installation of the Supreme, whether we call him God, Kamata, Allah, Mvelingangi, or whatever other name we affix to him. So in a way, a newborn is perhaps God's way of gifting earth humanity in its purest form. According to Biko, if it is inborn, then Black people have the right to demand their place in the circle of humanity. This approach to humanity is as much about rights as it is about responsibilities. Accordingly, one human being cannot willingly deprive another of their humanity, but escape with theirs unscathed. So in a way, if it is a game, then it is a zero-sum game. Further, one cannot be indifferent to the affront by others on the humanity of a third party. They should be moved to act because, as Biko teaches us, I am because you are. So in understanding humanity this way, the rights question triggers then an obligation and a duty on the part of those who hold power. Whether we hold that power as citizens, whether in institutions or government. The rights of children, of women, the elderly, the rights of workers, citizens, these are mandatory matters that must be honored by parents, by spouses, by employers, governments, and political leadership. And the speaker before me speaks of our South African Constitution, which embraces this approach to human rights as something inherent in us. It assumes that we are born with humanity, and from this endowment flows our human rights. And so in the Bill of Rights that is referred to by Dr. Pandor, there are many rights guaranteed in there, but there are two that are guaranteed in the ultimate. The Bill of Rights guarantees the right to life and the right to human dignity in the ultimate. And by that I mean, it asks the question, to what extent should these be protected? And in responding to that question, it uses an unambiguous term. It says they are non-derogable rights, so they cannot be violated. Now, if you understand rights that way, then there are serious implications, even for our government. If 54% of our people live beneath the breadline, which is a violation of their dignity, it's not just a petty matter that we can refer to as poverty. It is actually a constitutional crisis, right? And I think that challenges that we have, such as the level of violence against women, the girl child, the murder rate, the trafficking of human beings, corruption that erodes the capacity of the state to support public services, those are matters we should regard as a constitutional crisis. And I think that it's time we went beyond the toi-toi and we begin to look at using the Constitution to enforce those rights. I promise that I will be back on this campus as one of the leaders of the national dialogue to take forward this challenge posed by Prof. Pandor, to look at how, in fact, as citizens, we can once more hold those we elect into office to account. Now, in a way, we cannot continue to be comfortable with the walking dead that we see. You know, Biko said, you are either alive and proud or you are dead. So his message was, you can only live with pride, and there is no pride and dignity in poverty. Supremacist regimes like South Africa's apartheid and Nazism, Zionism, and now Trumpism represent the innate belief that humanity is a commodity, is divisible, right? And this problem starts with an artificial construction, right? A basis upon which they place themselves in the seat of God in order to appropriate the benefits of humanity on his behalf as a commodity. They define themselves as the standard of humanity and its universal virtues, and they argue that they are anointed to control who is a worthy recipient of human rights. They craft justifications for, actually, this is how God should have done this thing, right? Based on race, based on creed, on gender, and of late, of course, on the question of the national interest. Whereas South Africa continues to face immense internal crises, we must acknowledge that there was a moment, and I've spoken to Dr. Pandor about it, where we struck a chord the world has failed to play. And the leadership of South Africa in calling Zionism to account put the international human rights framework to test at the ICJ, as has been spoken of. There are around 44,000 bodies at the bottom of the rubble in Gaza. They have never thrown a stone because these are just only the children and their mothers. They are innocent people, and in full view of the world, they have been visited the most abominable atrocities in modern times. This is what Saul Plaatje says about children back in 1913 or thereabout. The deceased child had to be buried, but where, when, and how? Even criminals dropping straight from the gallows can claim 6 feet of ground on which to rest their criminal remains. But under the cruel operation of the Land Act, children whose only crime is that God did not make them white are sometimes denied that right in their ancestral home. And he could have been speaking of the children in Palestine. Like those of South Africa, the children of Palestine needed one voice, but the guideposts of humanity had been abandoned. And being a people who are born and who understand that I am because you are, we did the right thing to help bring a halt to the madness. And that moment for me represented a triumph of Sobukwe's quest to infuse righteousness in the document we now call the South African ID, to carry it with pride. And it is what Biko meant when he said, the great powers of the world may have done wonders in giving the world an industrial look, but the great gift still has to come from Africa, giving the world a more human face. We know from history that such endeavors do not come without a cost. It was Biko who said, in a bid for change, we must be prepared to lose our comfort, security, our jobs and our positions of privilege, our families, for just as it is true that leadership and security are incompatible, it may well be true that a struggle without casualties is not worth its salt. Some of our own citizens have used the backlash referred to by Dr. Pandor to forge alliances that are built on falsehoods. In these coalitions, there is no care given to the question of values, what is right, what is wrong. And had integrity been used as a criterion, then it would have had to reckon with the following observations. It's not our president that has been indicted in the International Criminal Courts to respond to a case of genocide. That leader lives in Tel Aviv. In fact, prior to October the 7th, his own people had held 37 weeks of uninterrupted protest because he wanted to extend his powers and to undermine oversight by the courts on the decisions of his leadership. So his own people were saying, you are not accountable or willing to be accountable. And it's regrettable that those who lost innocent citizens in that incident of October 7th, which cannot be condoned to the extent that it, of course, also killed innocent people, those who lost innocent citizens have had their genuine grief being used and exploited to fuel a genocide for political expediency to cling to power by Netanyahu. It's not our president who believes that women can be grabbed by their crouches, at least not this one, right? In South Africa, we call this sexual harassment. It's not our president who assumed office as a convicted felon, guilty of 34 counts, and who faced innumerable other charges, and who now seeks retribution against officials of the Department of Justice that presided over his matters. In South Africa, we call that abuse of power. It's not our president who employs friends and family into his office. In South Africa, we agreed to call that nepotism. It's not our president who encourages the storming and destruction of his own parliament and the hostage-taking of his own deputy and lawmakers. In South Africa, we call that treason. Our courts have not ruled that a president is above the law. Our courts have held even the founder of our democracy, President Nelson Mandela, before them. They have thrown a successor behind bars for contempt of court, who is a man who was a former president. Our government does not issue expulsions to diplomats with whom we differ. In South Africa, even when they bring us into disrepute based on fiction, we issue a démarche, which is to invite them in for a tough conversation, for them to explain themselves. So for years, the likes of AfriForum and Solidarity have been the primary beneficiaries of democracy. They have exploited the letter of the Constitution to undermine the spirit of the Constitution, which ultimately seeks to attain an egalitarian society. And now that they have encountered a constitutional challenge on the primary interest that they have, which is land, right? They have elected to abandon our Constitution and to seek cover behind a constitutional delinquent. They seek his support to trump the South African Constitution. In offering them asylum, he accidentally called their bluff. And it's telling that the response by Kali, the leader of AfriForum, was, no thank you, it will be too costly. And the cost referred to is the loss of privilege that the democratic government has kept intact since 1994 for their exclusive indulgence. Thus, for as long as South Africa abides by constitutional guardrails, we should cease to explain ourselves. We should not be beholden to attempts to make sense of our democracy to those who make no sense of theirs. We should not send emissaries to betray our soul. We should not strike deals that dance around our values. And you can tell here that I'm not the diplomat on the podium. In 1977, as I begin to wrap up, at the age of 30, Biko penned a memorandum addressed to President Jimmy Carter, who had just assumed office earlier that year as the 39th president of the US. And that memorandum was delivered to Carter through Senator de Klerk, who had visited South Africa and met some leaders, including Biko. And in it, he puts Carter to terms thus, and I quote, "At this stage of the liberation process, we have become very sensitive to the role played by the world's big figures, or big powers. In a sense, America, your country, has played a shameful role in her relationship with our country. Mr. Carter will therefore no doubt be aware that he takes up office at a time when American influence in Africa has become particularly significant. If he stands on the side of those whose righteousness may not be doubted, he shall have used tremendous influence that America holds legitimately and usefully. If, on the other hand, he assists those who are trying to keep the dock still, then America will have perpetually tarnished her name in the eyes of black people in this country," end quote. So, to return to the piano. The sound of the piano under master's hand is like the poetic articulations of the international community on the question of human rights. There is a lot of vocalization on this subject, in particular from Western countries who portray themselves as custodians of virtue. These articulations tend to fall within an underwhelming range. Whilst inspired, they are inadequate. At times, they are simply noise. They drift in and out of moral tune depending on the question of the so-called national interest. At worst, they are completely jarring when one examines the gross misconduct of these very countries under the guise of being leaders of the free world. So Nduzo Makhathini responds then by saying, "I concur with Monk that the piano needs more keys." He argues that in his own experience, the complexity of influences and the rich cultural sources of his creative prowess as Makhathini cannot be adequately communicated within the existing range of the piano. Thus, a wider range would be better at expressing his own creative spirit. Africa's humanity, as articulated by Biko and Black Consciousness, as well as many of our leaders that I have cited, offers us the tools to deepen the subject of human rights and global activism. Our contribution is to bring a new arrangement, playing as empowered by our values, keys that others may not appreciate for now, because they exist outside of the range of their aptitude. In time, we shall be in a position to form a chorus of voices that instill the culture of never again. And if we struggle as we do this, let us seek solace from the fact that the term of office, at least in the American administration, is 4 years. We have a balance of 3 years and 8 months. Long in politics, but very short in history. Then we will see what happens. My suspicion is that the charlatans who are revisionists of history and who are sitting on the fence of values will be douged out, only for us to welcome them back with a tune from a range they will understand better. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all of Kali's men could not put Humpty Dumpty together again. Thank you very much.
The piano needs more keys. Thank you very much, Mr. B. Because you were speaking, I briefly thought about Frantz Fanon's pitfalls of national consciousness and what it speaks on to, and how you highlighted the importance of umntu ngabantu, and how in the sovereign context that's fostered within the Bantu Pili principles, and how it ensures to conscientize and create a conscious society that seeks to advance ethical leadership and a moral society. Ladies and gentlemen, we had the privilege of listening to both Dr. Naledi Pandor as well as Mr. Kosinati Biko. Now it's time to even further the conversation with our esteemed respondents, two dynamic individuals who bring a wealth of knowledge and passion and fresh perspective on the table. But before we do that, that session is going to be conducted by Ms. Kiabetswe Lebudi. I just want to, I'm not sure if we can, so that for consistency, if Kia, you can move that way, and then Doc, you can come in that way, so that there's a flow in terms of engagement. Before I hand over to Kia, I just want to introduce who Kia is. Kia Lobudi is a driven and ambitious individual, currently pursuing a third year of undergrad studies in Bachelor of Arts at Soulblight University. Her leadership expertise began to flourish in 2024 when she joined the Umnandi House Committee as the Media and Projects Officer. During her tenure, she actively participated in women empowerment programs and community outreach initiatives, passionately advocating for societal needs. Kiabetswe's commitment to creating positive change extended beyond the university, as she's one of the founders of the Real Talk campaign, a non-profit organization in Gauteng dedicated to promoting human rights and educating young individuals about addressing pressing issues. Within the Soulblight University, Kiabetswe serves as the Media and Projects Officer of the Student Representative Council. Her leadership philosophy emphasizes the empowering of women to occupying leadership spaces and ensuring their voices are represented. Kiabetswe's outstanding contribution to women's empowerment and leadership have been recognized through several prestigious awards. In 2024, she was honored at the Campus Housing Accommodation Unit, third annual woman, as the third woman advocate for the year, acknowledging her tireless efforts in promoting women's rights and empowerment. Additionally, she received the Dean's Emerging Leader of the Year Award in 2024, a testament to exceptional leadership potential and commitment to making a positive impact. Through her various roles and initiatives, Kiabetswe continues to demonstrate her dedication to foster growth, inclusivity, and positive change in the community. And I must say she does that with vigor, very persistent. If I could give over to Ms. Elwood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mnyaka, for the warm introduction. Your words are truly appreciated, and your leadership in student affairs continues to inspire and motivate us all in student affairs. It truly is an honor to be standing here today and guiding us through what promised to be a thought-provoking and stimulating discussion. As we reflect on the powerful addresses of our keynote speakers, we recognize the depth of wisdom shared with us today. Dr. Naledi Pandor's insights into the intersection of policy, education, and transformation reminded us of the immense responsibility we carry as change makers. Her words challenged us to not only envision a better future, but to actively construct it with intention and purpose. And in her words, leadership is not about position, but it's about the contributions. It calls us as citizens of South Africa to take charge in bringing in the change that we want to see, the implementation that she addressed today. Likewise, Mr. Nkosinathi Biko's reflections reminded us of the ongoing struggle for justice, dignity, and true liberation. His address was powerful, a powerful call to action as well, one that urges us to protect, heal, and become the best versions of ourselves, both individually and collectively as South African citizens. Now it's time to extend this discussion further on. Today, we are also joined by two esteemed respondents that I will be introducing right now. And they will be bringing in immense knowledge, experience, and passion to what we will be delving into today's discussion. First up, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Nyawo Gumede. Dr. Nyawo Gumede, originally from Ingwavuma, near Jozini in the northern KwaZulu-Natal, serving as distinguished academic who graduated with 4 degrees and is currently has his highest degree in doctorate with public management and governance. He currently lectures in public management and governance at Soapblike University. Dr. Gumede has held several key leadership roles within the university, including serving as the chair of the University Institutional Forum and as a member of the University Council and Senate. He is also the chair of Public Service Associations at Soapblike University. His previous positions include head of department, faculty academic manager, and founding chair of research on campus. Additionally, he serves as the coordinator of the Public Management Postgraduate Diploma at SPU. An active researcher, Dr. Gumede has presented over 63 conference papers and published more than 20 articles and book chapters, both locally and internationally. He supervises postgraduate students across 3 universities. Beyond academia, he is dedicated warden at Umnandi Hall of Residence, one where I can say that I had the privilege to have him as a personal mentor in my first and second year. He is also an ordained church elder at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in South Africa. With his deep understandings of how policies shape our world, we can expect nothing but a thought-provoking and critical dialogue from him today. Secondly, we have MX Nonofo Quinton. Nonofo Quinton Willifant is a dedicated leader, educator, and advocate for student empowerment, hailing from Pampierstad in the Northern Cape. Despite facing financial hardships, including the passing of his father and the unemployment of his mother, this did not stop him from achieving his academic goals. He earned a Bachelor of Education in degree he earned a Bachelor of Education degree and remained committed to academic excellence. He is currently studying an honors degree in curriculum studies, and he also has a passion of education and social change, which has driven him to improve the quality of education in South Africa. Nonofo's leadership journey began in 2022 in Soapblike University as the Gender, Safety and Disability Officer of the South African Students' Congress. Upon that, he became the academic officer of the SRC in Soapblike University for 2022 and 2023, where he also received the Dean's Award for the exceptional contributions. In 2024, he was inaugurated as the SRC president for Soapblike University, and he is currently the SRC president. His leadership extends internationally, where he went to represent Soapblike University at the South African Swedish University Forum in Sweden and the Next Generation Leaders Program in Rwanda. His journey is a testament of resilience, vision, and the power of leadership in transforming communities. Expect also a bold and engaging perspective from him that challenges the status quo that we are facing in South Africa today. actionable solutions that are going to be called within this conversation that we are going to go into. So as we give over to our respondents to delve into this discussion, may we allow ourselves to be capacitated with the knowledge of taking charge of our country as citizens. As our responses share their perspectives and views of what we're going through as citizens in South Africa and the current status quo is, I want us to also embody ourselves with everything that is being shared today. So without further ado, I will allow our respondents to give into their perspectives, but we will follow procedure. So I will give over to Dr. Gumede, and then MX Willifant will follow after. Thank you.
I don't know whether I should stand up. I just want to say thank you, Program Director, Honorable Prof. Mayor. Thank you for welcoming us here. Dr. Naledi, I'm happy to see you. Mr. Biko, I am happy to see you again. And welcome everybody. I just want to say that, as has been said by the program director, I come from a small town or village called Ingwavuma. It's in KZN. So when I look at Minister Naledi Pandor, you know, I'm not looking at her. I'm looking at Malume Joe, you know, her father. People who crossed from South Africa to exile, they passed through our home in Ingwavuma to Swaziland and Mozambique. So those were very brave people. As Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor was talking about leadership, you have to take up leadership at some point in time. You know, in face of a problem. If there is a problem, men and women shall rise up. I don't want to quote Dr. Naledi Pandor again, because in one of the clips, she says, in face of human rights abuses globally, unions must rise up and rise up. I'm sure some of you have seen that clip. Leadership is about taking responsibility. It's about taking responsibility. It's about making decisions. During apartheid, people in the ANC, people in the PAC, people in the AZAPO, they had to take decisions to lead a struggle against human rights abuse. Apartheid government was a government which abused human rights to an extent that you find that a quarter or a percentage of South Africans did not enjoy their lives because of leadership of apartheid, and they ended up in exile. So people had to take leadership and challenge apartheid. The Sharpeville massacre is a good example of how people resisted the past laws. And they stood up to take leadership, mobilized people to say, we're not going to tolerate this. It's a good example. You know, the 1976 Soweto uprising as well. A good example of how youth took up leadership. Oh, okay. By the way, the youth of nowadays, they have got a word which they like to use. Hey, leadership, hey, leadership. Do you really know what it means? It really means taking responsibility positively and constructively. I want to tell you that leadership is a very critical decision to make as well, because there are South Africans who left South Africa and lived in Angola as well. People lived in Quito Valley. People died at Quito Valley. People died at Quatro. Why? Because of a conviction that South Africa must be free. People lived in Bontleng, in Botswana, because of a conviction. People lived in Moleplule in Botswana because of a conviction that people must be liberated. Those were leaders. Those were great leaders of the nation. So putting national interest is very critical as well. As a leader, you must make sure that at municipal level, at provincial level, at national level, the interests of the country are taken into consideration. And Dr. Naledi Pandor is correct. We should not be bullied by any foreign country to accede to what they want. In the first place, if you are bullied to accept what other people want, are you a country? Are you a country? So South Africa again took responsibility to challenge the American preponderancy in political architecture of the world and challenged it. A lot of people wonder why and how did it happen? It is because of one good reason. South Africa experienced exactly the same type of genocide which is taking place in Gaza during apartheid. So they had the experience of standing up and challenging a well-established regime. That is the main reason, and challenging abuse of human rights. I just want to tell you something coincidental. Currently, the topic I'm teaching, I know Mr. Patsa is here, my HOD. The topic I'm teaching now deals with, and I've written it deliberately because it's in my course outline, Dr. Naledi. I'm teaching about the state, the rule of law, accountability, civil society involvement, and public value. Coincidental, Mr. Patsa. So when we talk about governance, we are talking about a government, a state that is efficient, effective, productive, and competitive in service delivery. When a state formulates policies, it must implement them efficiently, effectively, productively, and competitively as well for purposes of good service delivery. And when we talk about the rule of law, it shouldn't be just the application of the rule of law, but it should be the efficient and effective application of the rule of law through the instrumentality of our magisterial courts, supreme courts, high courts, and constitutional court in protection of human rights. Human rights are at the core of leadership. A leadership that values human rights and protects human rights is an efficient leadership. But a leadership that does not value human rights is an abusive leadership. In fact, categorically speaking, we have got two dangers in the world currently as we sit. Two major dangers in the world. One, autocratic political leadership. If you have an autocratic political leader, that's a danger to human rights. The second serious danger to human rights is firepower, excessive firepower. Excessive firepower. If you look at what's happening in Gaza, you will see what I mean by excessive firepower. There is a bomb which is called bunker booster bomb. A bunker booster bomb can kill all of us here as we are sitting here. And it goes 30 meters down to destroy down there. Is that not abuse of human rights? Surely it is. So South Africa is correct to go to the International Criminal Court of Justice to challenge what's happening in Gaza. Accountability. Leaders must account. Leaders must account to their citizens. Failure to account to their citizens lead to what Professor Asimitlu and Robinson called bad governance. Bad governance is a circumstance where a particular leadership accounts to nobody, like someone we know. You don't account to anyone. You do what you feel. That's called bad governance. You know, and the state will have lost its strength in allowing one human being to control and dominate what happens in a particular country. Not only in a particular country, but globally. When we talk about governance, also who comes to our mind? Montesquieu. Montesquieu enshrined a principle called the principle of separation of powers, that the legislative arm of government, the executive arm of government, the judiciary, should have a system of checking on one another. And the reason why South Africa is still standing, Dr. Naledi Pandor, is because at least we have got an institution called the judiciary, which is still working. If you are corrupt, you are taken out. At least we have an institution that people have got faith in. That's why you find political parties, when they have differences, they go to court. Why? Because at least we have an institution that people have got trust in. So the doctrine of separation of powers is of critical importance in governance. Once the separation of powers is diffused, once the principle of separation of powers is annihilated by individuals, then we have no country. So, to me, the greatest human rights abuses that have taken place in the century is settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, it took away the rights of individuals. It took away land from people. It took away land and the economic source of power from people. So to me, colonialism and settler colonialism in particular, and you know, in South Africa, we had what we called colonialism of a special type. That type of colonialism was the greatest human rights abuse that we have ever witnessed. To the accompaniment of that, I would also want to hasten to say failure to annihilate colonialism in a country after apartheid is also a human rights abuse. Because what does it help to still see people in Guguletu, Kailicha, and Langa living the same way they were living in 1960? What does it help to see people who are staying in Mlazi and Kwadukuza staying the same way as they were staying in the 1960s? What does it help to go to Sibukeng and see people in Zone 14 still living the same way they were living in 1960? Is that not gross human rights abuse? It is. It is gross human rights abuse. Those things must be corrected by a good government. And I also want to hasten to mention the World Bank approach to governance and good governance, which to some level I do not agree with. Because governance is not only financial. The World Bank, IMF, talks about good governance referring to the extent to which financial resources are curtailed. Mark my words, I'm not saying used, curtailed. Because if you look at John Williamson's approach, principle number 1, which talks about cutting costs in social spending. How do you cut costs or social spending in an underdeveloped country? If you read Miele Tsimbeki's book on poverty, he will tell you that there are two types of people in South Africa: rich people and poor people. And if you read Thabo Mbeki as well, he talks about a third world country in a first world country. Now you tell us we must cut social spending, meaning people who are staying in Guguletu should stay like that. You can't improve them. Perhaps the World Bank should have said responsible social spending, you know, because you can't continue to abuse people by making them to live the same way as they were living in 1960. I think the minister, Dr. Pandor, has mentioned something very critical. You cannot compromise your national interests. You can't. Take away your global treaties. If you are to use your global treaties to abuse national interest, then we don't need that. But you know what? South Africa is full of intelligent leaders. They say, we are not going to behave the same way as you, but we create a dialogue. We send a delegation to discuss with you. I want to come to, I want to say something that former Minister Naledi Pandor said. She said that very touchingly, because some of us, we follow important leaders like her. She said, when what's happening in the Middle East is taking place, where are the unions? Because in the past, unions could stand up. And she said, not only national unions, globally, You know, unions, if you have, okay, let me put it bluntly. If you have got NEHAU in South Africa, we have got NEHAU in Spain, you've got NEHAU in Namibia, you've got NEHAU in Germany. What are they saying about human rights abuses? And she said, unions, rise up, rise up. To me, it caught my mind. Looking at what was said by Mr. Biko here, I just want to start by saying your mom was my vice chancellor. Yeah, at UCT. And she used to, you know how your mom looks. She would even, in a congregation like this, she would just sneak in with that BMW 525 series. So she would just sneak in, and you know what she did? What she did to us the previous week, there was a musician called Lebu Matosa. She came to our residence, with 15 dancers. I'm not going to say their gender. So they were dancing profusely. And she heard about it. She heard about it. And you know what she did on Monday, the following Monday? No beaches on campus. Because those ladies danced profusely and disappeared profusely. We never saw them. I want to say that your presentation, for me, when you invoked Frantz Fanon, you made my day. Because, you know, Steve Biko says, I like what I say. I'm going to say what I want. That speaks of utmost freedom. It's freedom at its best. But colonial apartheid, settler colonialism, was blocking that. You wouldn't speak the way you want. If you speak the way you want, tomorrow morning you are not here. So Steve Biko was very correct in actually valuing the value of an individual, the value of being a being. Lee Ndate Robert Sobukwe. Yes, Ndate Robert Sobukwe, greatest hero of our times. You know, breaking away in 1959 from the ANC did not mean that the struggle was not going to be fought. The struggle against human rights abuse. PAC continued in its own way, you know, and the belief in land redistribution is a correct one. Because without land, you know, we buy tomatoes, we buy mango. If you come to KwaZulu-Natal, we sleep on top of mango. Avocado. But here we are buying. We are buying. Why? Because the land is not ours. So land is also some form of freedom. I am because you are. Powerful. I am because you are. Steve Biko was very correct. I actually watched a video, which I don't want to watch again. You know, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Of him, actually. Where he said that no matter, even if you can kill me, I'm not going to change what I believe in. So it speaks of human rights, you know. I want to say that children have rights, women have rights, students have rights, also lecturers have rights. And management has rights as well. I want to say finally, combining what Dr. Naledi Pandor has said and looking at the discussions, I want to say that human rights, there is a symbiosis between good governance, human rights, accountability, and public value. What government gives us, do we derive value in it? If you have got a SASSA card, do you derive value from it? When the government says no child shall sleep without food, is it abuse of human rights? Is it not caring? It is caring, but what I want to say is that government which enhances allocative efficiency, distributive efficiency in service delivery, it is a best government. But a government which exercises inefficiency, ineffectiveness in service delivery is not a good government. However, I want you to know that there can be governments that weaken the Constitution. And I want to hasten to say that it is not intelligent to tamper with the Constitution. Because if you tamper with the Constitution, you are tampering with the spinal cord of a country. I thank you.
Dumelang, good morning. Are we all well? Thank you. As I've been introduced, my name is Nonofo Quentin Oliphant, and I am the SRC president. Before I start, let me just extend my greetings to Professor Deborah Meyer, the mother of the house, for the day, and Dr. Naledi Pandor, Mr. Nkosina Tipiko, the Dean of Students in absentia, administrative staff, and Student Representative Council, you are greeted. Not forgetting, I see representatives from DeGale, they are here, and also the Northern Cape Citizen Colloquium on Constitutionalism. I am proud to announce it because I'm one of the co-founders, and the reason why we decided to go on that is because here at SPU, Dr. Naledi, we don't have a law faculty. And when you represent students in disciplinary hearing, you have to argue with a law representative. So it was very crucial for us to have this so that now the rights of students are being well represented in a law maybe table, if I may put, for a lack of a better word. Esteemed guests, viewers online, you are greeted. So in responding to what our guest speakers have said, and also adding what I prepared, Dr. Naledi Pandor, I would agree with you to say good governance implies responsiveness and monitoring of process to ensure promotion of human rights. So as the student representative, when I saw the topic, I was like, what is the role of leadership in advancing the human rights? And in doing my research, I found that effective leadership plays a very crucial role in driving human rights agendas. Leaders who champion human rights use their platforms to raise awareness, influence policy, and mobilize communities towards meaningful change. Ethical leadership ensures that human rights principles remain at the core of governance and social development. So, Mr. Biko, Steve Biko is one of the people that I look up to because his philosophy to life, I love it. You know, I love the perspective, or rather the school of thought that he was coming from. He is one of the most influential figures in South Africa's struggles against apartheid, and he remains one. So, as the founder of the Black Consciousness Movement, Steve Biko played a very pivotal role in shaping a sense of identity, you know, a sense of pride and resilience among Black South Africans. And I would say that I'm one of the people that really, you know, adopted his philosophy. And he emphasizes on psychological liberation as a foundation for political freedom, encouraging Black individuals to reject the internalized inferiority imposed by the white oppression. The principles of Steve Biko, they champion dignity, self-determination, and equality, which continues to guide activists fighting for human rights in this modern democracy. So, the modern democracy, when I tackled it, I noticed that it tackles issues such as economic inequality, gender-based violence, xenophobia, access to education and healthcare. organizations such as Human Rights Commission, grassroots movement, and civil society groups have taken up the mantle to ensure that the rights enshrined in the South African Constitution are upheld. So now, I have a question, or rather the question that I had to the esteemed guest is that in the current South African democracy, is the right to education still upheld to advance the human rights? I want us to let it sink, think about it, and also think about it for your questions. Are we really still upholding the right to education? And I'm saying this because in this year's registrations, I'll go back down to university student. I'm a student representative at the end of the day. So the South African Constitution under Section 29, 1B, it guarantees the right to further education, which states that the state must make progressively available and accessible through reasonable measures. However, financial exclusion undermines that particular right, the right to education, in several ways. A lot of students, not only in South Africa, but across the country, they were financially excluded. And this fight, for here us at Solplaki, I did say even to the council to say that it's a fight that wants us to engage. You did mention, Mr. Biko, to say some fights, Toi cannot even, pass you through them. You need to sit down and engage and come up with policies that will speak positively to the right of education, or rather the right for students to get education. We fought, and I'll tell you for free that it's very difficult to fight the management that has already decided, that this is what we, or this is rather how we going. However, I will commend the university, for the consensus that we made, just to ensure that we do help students to register and onboard to the system. So, although some we could not cover, especially due to academics, the Vice Chancellor would say to you, how do you assist a person who's academically not doing well? Because even if you try to go look for funding for them, it's a problem. So it's a call to us also as students to ensure that we do take our work seriously. It's very important that when you are in an institution of higher learning, you ensure that the business that you came here for, in record time, you live with it. But we do have challenges, I understand. But just make sure, because it's very difficult to argue for somebody that's not performing, and that's the reality of the matter. So these financial exclusions, they have given limited access. Students from historically advantaged backgrounds, particularly Black South Africans, are disproportionately affected by financial constraints, preventing them from enrolling in tertiary education. It's a problem because now NSFAS would be telling you that if you are above the 350K, then your parents should be able to pay for you. But what happens to somebody who comes from a family of 6, 7, 8, and they're depending on that particular 350K to ensure that the family is sustainable? Tertiary fees are expensive, Dr. Pandor, and they keep on increasing. Even now they have increased, which means that failure for students this year, those that have enrolled to get bursaries, next year it will be the very same thing again that we've experienced this year. Many universities impose strict fees payment requirements, resulting in academically capable but financially struggling students being denied access to registrations. exams and graduation. For example, here at SPU, the new financial guidelines, they impose that if you are owing whatever amount that you are owing, you need to decrease it to a threshold of 25,000. So if you are owing 100,000, for example, you will have to decrease it to 25,000. Where do you get it? From what family, what background are you coming from? It's still a problem for us. As a result, you are being financially blocked. You cannot onboard, enroll into the system. So these are also some of the things that are not speaking to the advancement of human rights, because if you start to block me financially, knowing very well that the students maybe, or rather the target market that you have as an institution, as a target market that's speaking to students that are from disadvantaged background. I mean, 90% of our students, they are using NSFAS. So that tells you, Mr. Pico, that we are from middle class, families. Maybe 10% can be able to pay the fees, but the rest cannot. It's a challenge that we're facing as a society. NSFAS, some they declare you that you can be able to pay because of the 350K rule. But in terms of paying, are we really able to, regarding or taking into consideration the backgrounds that we're coming from as young female and male students, not forgetting your days and your terms. This all leaves us with a high dropout rate and unfulfilled potentials. Dreams are being shattered, dreams despair, because if you are in a stage whereby finance stands before you and your dreams, then it means that you're going to have to go back home and there won't be anything positive that you are going to be, imparting back there, because you did not achieve what you came here for due to the financial exclusions. It's important that we have a conversation around what you call the cancellation of debts, as to whether is it possible or not. Fees must fall in 2015 to 2017. It was a national movement that was demanding free and decolonized education, driven by the financially excluded students. So, is it as an entire movement currently, are these financial guidelines speaking to it? That's a question that we have. No. These financial guidelines, they're just excluding us from ensuring that we receive the right to education. We understand that universities, yes, they are in a business, but it's important also through engagement and policy to ensure that now we come up with a student-centric, model of funding, debt collection. Because from all the Black students maybe that are enrolled in this university, some of them, putting in mind the time that the university even communicated out these financial guidelines, they had to go through emotional turmoil to try and outsource the money. Yes, some managed to get, but some did not. It's still a problem that we have. So, in terms of the debt, is my time getting there? I'm finishing. So, in terms of debt cancellation, is it necessary in South Africa or not? It's a question that we have. And as a student representative council, I would say yes, it is necessary. But there should be measures that are being put into place to ensure that, it's not just anybody or everybody that will just come and say that I've got a debt, it must be cancelled. We are in a higher institution of learning. Yes, English. So we need to excel academically. It's so hard, Mr. Biko, Dr. Pandor, to tell a student that's deserving, that's academically deserving, to say you cannot be assisted because now you are owing. Maybe the government should look into this. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say, I haven't covered some of my things, but because of time, I'd just like to say that the Steve Biko legacy continues to inspire human rights advocacy worldwide. The fight for justice is an ongoing process, requiring committed leadership and allocative action, and together with collective action. By embracing the principle of dignity, equality, and empowerment, individuals and leaders can contribute to building a more just and equitable society. Whether through activism, policy making, or community engagement, the responsibility to uphold and advance human rights remains crucial and enduring endeavor. Universities could become an important source of ensuring, through research and innovation, of ensuring that we come up with a suitable solution, like how they're doing in the UK, in Australia. You know, the funding model there, it works. Maybe it's time we'd also do revisit to check as to whether it's NSFA's model, how it is right now, since it got in from being a loan to being a bursary. Is it really sustainable or not? Because now all the laws that are being imposed there are laws that are just denying you access. We've got your N+2 rule laws right now, which says that if you have been in the system for over 4 years, whether you are funded or not funded by NSFAS, NSFAS cannot fund you that particular time you want to study. So it's a problem. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Allow me to thank Dr. Gumede and MX Wedifund for the responses. From what I got and what stood out for me, most importantly from the respondents, is what leadership really is and the implementation. A leadership that protects human rights is efficient, according to Dr. Gumede. An autocratic leadership is a danger to human rights. And this speaks to us as South Africans to appreciate the democratic leadership that we have right now at the moment. And this morning I had the honor to engage with Dr. Pandor, and we were delving into the social phenomena that we were dealing with in South Africa. And I asked her a question that, will we ever address the social phenomena that we are dealing with in South Africa? And her answer was yes. So as a young individual in South Africa, and I think I can speak to most of us in this room today to say that we've already given up, we've lost hope of that addressing of the social phenomena that we are dealing with in South Africa. But with her response today of saying that yes, it will be addressed, it's a beacon of hope to us. So it calls us not to take for granted the freedom that we have. And you know, in our political organization, we have the slogan that we sing that says that agenda yama capitalist asifuni, meaning that the agenda of the capitalist, we do not want the agenda of the capitalist. So as young individuals today, and for us having the honor to have Mr. Biko and Dr. Pandor today here, it reminds us that we shouldn't take the freedom that we have in South Africa, the democracy, we need to take charge, be citizens that are working towards the change that needs to be implemented, because implementation is very important. There's a lot of promises that we keep on hearing, but without implementations, they are null and void. So now this brings us to the moment that we've all been waiting for, questions and answers. So our panelists are available here and they will be responding to your questions. And I would ask that we please keep them concise and to the point so that we can attend to most questions of the attendees here today. So we will try to take 2 rounds of questions. May I ask that our student leaders assist us in noting the questions. So we'll start off with our first round. We'll allow everyone to ask their questions. We'll take hands and then allow our panelists to respond. So can we have hands, please, if you have questions? Okay. So we can start off with the gentleman right there. Thank you.
Let me send. Good day, everybody. The name is Dick Pechwa. I'm from Priska, and there's a particular reason why I mentioned Priska, but I'm not going to go into that. Mine is not a question; it's a comment, and I would want a comment from Prof. Pandor and Mr. Biko. I want to link what was presented by them to what I would say is the response of our government to what's happening, the decrees by President Trump, specifically on the declaration of a persona non grata of our ambassador. Now, if I have to take from what the spokesperson, Mr. Vincent Magwenya was saying in the response, I'm just saying that the expulsion of our ambassador and the response seem to be that of as if our government would want to appease, the US, and at the risk of losing our own voice and sovereignty and our independence. That is the first one. I want to hear what you're saying about that. And also, I see a positive line in this Trumpism that we experience currently. Positive in the sense in what Mr. Biko presented in terms of, we're not going to see now an immediate positive of that, but where he calls for self-reliance and self-sustenance. In the long run, it also calls for us to look inwardly in terms of trying to address that. And we know the funding that we've been relying on donor funding. Now it's calling us to rely on ourselves, especially in what he characterized as a constitutional crisis, where 52% of our population, they live below the breadline. And this now, and that is why the point, that in order to realize that self-reliance, I believe that we need a different kind of leadership that I feel that we're currently lacking. Different leadership who will make South Africa and Africa great again. Thanks.
Thank you. May I please request that when you ask your question, may you please also mention who you're posing the question to from the panelist, and also may we try to keep it to one question per person. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Program Director. My name is Ivan Steenkamp. I'm here from Kimberley. I'm a skills development practitioner, a research, and a consultant as well. Two quick comments and three quick questions to three panelists. I think firstly from Professor Pandor's presentation, my takeaway there is also to the Vice Chancellor incoming, his opportunity she highlighted for SPU in terms of science and innovation, research, and also in our 10 to 11 years now to run as a very efficient institution. So I think we have huge opportunities for supply key as well with science, innovation, and research. So thanks for that. Second, I think also a takeaway from Renkosinati Biko is poverty being a constitutional crisis. And we need to use our constitution to enforce our human rights. In the fraternity of preaching and teaching, we normally say that poverty is a sin. So thanks for bringing that back to the fore again here this morning. For the three panelists, each one of the three of you as part of the panel. The first question then to Professor Naledi Pandor. The increasing address of rather how can South Africa's leadership structure be strengthened to ensure that we have a more inclusive approach to protecting human rights, especially in our marginalized communities where human rights violations are more prevalent? That is a question to Dr. Naledi Pandor. And then the question to, I think this one goes to Dr. Gumede. What mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that governance structures are held accountable for human rights violations? And how can civil society organizations play a role in this process? And then the last one to Renkosinati Biko. Considering the increasing awareness of human rights issues amongst the youth, what strategies can be employed to ensure young people, like we have in this auditorium today, can actively engage in leadership, governance, and human rights advocacy within their communities? I thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Greetings. My name is Domfile Mapumulo. I'm from Masao Hall of President. My question is based to Professor Deborah Mayer when she said next year Sol Plaat University will add another faculty. So as an ICT student, if I would like to change to nursing, will it be possible? And will I apply with this year's results or my metric results? Thank you.
Is it? Thank you, everyone. My name is Mantedi Lizikobe, and I'm currently pursuing my honors in physical sciences geography. So my question is directed to our former minister, Dr. Pandor. It is an honor to engage with you today. So currently we have Minister in Presidency, who's Minister Nchaveni, and her Deputy Minister Mhluli. So I wanted to ask about leadership. What's your take on the future of our country being female, and how can we substantiate that? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take two more hands and allow our panelists to answer.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. My name is Sinako Koldeza. I'm from Masao Res, #1 Res. Thank you. So unfortunately, forgive me for breaking the rule. I'll be asking two questions, one to Dr. Pandor and the other for Mr. Biko. For Dr. Pandor, since having women in leadership thingy, Since having women in leadership is a developing thing, what challenges have you encountered as a woman in leadership, and how have you overcome them? And then as for Mr. Biko, how do you think that Steve Biko's idea about Black consciousness and self-reliance remain relevant to leadership today? Thank you.
Thank you. May we please take some hands from the bottom as well.
My name is Pavalo Tatomaongwa, Masao Hall of Residence, and
unfortunately, I have two questions as well. One for Dr. Pandora, and then the other for Mr. Biko. I quote, "We believe that in our collective duty to ensure that the Human Rights Council is always fit for purpose. However, the current division in the Council are impending from focusing on the victims of human rights in all regions of the world. We need to restrain ourselves from being part of the instrumentation of the Council and addressing current polarization, selectivity, and double standards in relation of human rights matters. In addition, as the High Commissioner stated this morning, we also need to overcome the binary view and logic that if you are not with us, you are against us." Question: how do we then ensure that the Human Rights Council is always fit for purpose? Furthermore, what measures can be put in place to incentivize the logic of overcoming the binary view and ideology that if you are not with us, you are against us?
One more question.
I'm so sorry. And then this one is for Mr. Biko. We know that the government is using taxpayers' money to fund welfare schemes. And my question is that we know that this is burdening the working class. And then combined with the proposed increase in value-added tax, this is threatening our ability to be self-reliant and is deemed a threat to our human rights. How do you propose that we use the Constitution to uphold our rights?
Thank you. So we'll allow one last question, and then the other hands will take them for the second round. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's Gordon Africa. It's Gordon Africa speaking. I do not know if the students do still play a very popular card game called Claverias. If you do play Claverias, you will know what it means to have the trumps in your hand, and excuse the pun. I believe that as South Africa, we do hold a number of trumps. First of all, we have excellent access to BRICS and new markets. I also believe that we control minerals critical to the USA's economy. We also have the ability to control important trade routes, and therefore we can impact on their value chains and the distribution of their goods. Question, both to Professor Pandor and also to Mr. Biko. Should we not call out Trump? Should we not call his bluff, as what President Traore and others have done? Should we not actively promote the de-dollarization? Trump has kicked us, and now he wants to decide how we must respond. Possibly, in the words of Biko, self-mitigation through self-reliance is what we should be striving for. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to allow our panelists to respond to the questions, starting with Dr. Pandor, then following with Mr. Biko, and following then with Dr. Gumede. Thank you. And then Prof. Deborah as well. Thank you.
Well, on the question of government appeasing the United States, I think all evidence indicates the opposite. The government has thus far stood their ground on issues of principle, and I think it's important that we support them in that regard. I haven't heard Mr. Trump on self-reliance. What I hear him saying is America should be great again, which means more exploitation of others rather than building a better world. If we were promoting self-reliance, we would see more wealthy countries investing in positive goals and programs, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which require significant funding. If there was promotion of self-reliance, we wouldn't be denying AIDS and HIV infected persons no access to proper treatment and thus assigning a death sentence to them. That is not self-reliance, it's selfishness, it's murder, and it's a real tragedy for many countries on the African continent. On the subject of leadership, I agree. I believe we need improved leadership. I think we need leadership of integrity, we need honesty, and we need competence. I sometimes marvel at the people that we choose and the ones we discard. So I do think, yes, indeed. But the people of South Africa have made a very important statement in the last election. They've given a warning that if you don't improve, we can deal with you. Our vote means something. So I think leaders do stand challenged now to begin to address transformative change in real terms if they have the aspiration to remain in leadership. I think the question of poverty would be addressed by you, so I shall leave that. I've tried to identify some that are directed at me. I think on the question of accountability, really we have mechanisms in South Africa. The question is, are we using them maximally? So are we responsive, for example, as Parliament, to efficient and good reports of the public protector? Do parliamentarians read the annual reports of the Human Rights Commission and take the cases that they identify and the recommendations arising from investigation into those cases? Do they take these seriously? My sense is often not. I think we have sufficient legislation in our country. And I believe now what we should be focused upon is implementation. And anyone who comes up with new legislation, we must make them stand up before the nation and explain what we needed. Sometimes we have so many statutes that actually we have statutes that trip over each other. And people believe that by crafting a new law, you are introducing a change when you are not. So I think a greater focus on implementation is absolutely imperative. I think Parliament should strengthen its oversight role. I think while Parliament oversees passage of the budget, they should be following through on utilization of the budget. I would be interested in knowing, for example, through a parliamentary question, which I've never been asked, as to, could I name 10 housing projects as human settlement minister that are currently underway in our country? We don't see those sorts of questions being asked, and that's part of accountability. So our oversight mechanisms must work more efficient. And Parliament should not be about showing how crude we can be. Parliament should be about indicating to all legislators that we expect you to be busy in addressing the interests of the people of South Africa and not your egos. And rudeness and all of that, the many long speeches, do not change our country. What changes our country is implementation. So we need to direct our governments to understand that what we want is performance. Female leadership, I think the prognosis is very positive, but we do have the dire situation of extreme violence against women in our country. It's a serious problem that I believe deserves a national conversation, a about why is it that men believe women belong to them, that they think we can be treated as their property, as a tool. And we should re-educate each other. One, women, that we should not tolerate this abuse, and we must do all we can to challenge it. And two, men, about how love and caring is better than hate and violence. It's a national problem that we need to address together, and we can't run away from it. And as long as we continue to have gender-based violence, the true potential of females in our society will not be realized. So it is a battle we have to wage, and it's one that we can wage together. On what challenges did I encounter? The first one was a gentleman calling me girly in a meeting, and me having to work up the courage to have a word with him later about that, and that you don't address women in that way. And I was a woman at the time. I already had one child. I was married, and he called me girly in a meeting. And after the meeting, I asked him if we could have a moment together, and I educated him about gender equality. He became a good friend after that and was very gender sensitive. So one of the lessons is don't be afraid to speak when abuse is underway. The second is that you do have a problem when you're pursuing either affirmative action or gender equality. If you are the sole woman in a company at a particular executive level, people believe you must be in every committee, every interview panel, every structure. And you become overstretched, particularly as an academic. And then you don't do research, you don't write, and you never get promoted. The other thing is, as women, we must become better at working together. Men are brilliant at caucusing. They go to a bar and they sit and they chat about how they will address their further empowerment. Women are so busy that they don't do that caucusing sufficiently. So we need to work together, we need to strategize, we need to plan. But also we need to have the skill. And so I believe hard work and reading are important. It's not that we are seeking favors, we want to be treated the same as everyone. And you can't be treated the same as everybody if you're not finishing your work, if you're not reading, if you're not knowledgeable about the domain in which you're located. So it's not about favors, it's about I am sufficiently competent to progress. Well, I think the matter of the binary attitude and practice of access to both international law and international humanitarian law is something that we must address in multilateral fora. I think we should do it by building stronger solidarity campaigns through our organizations, through BRICS, through ASEAN, through a stronger South, an emboldened South, a South that speaks up, a South that says, I am different, I'm progressive, I'm prepared to take a stand. And so I welcome the step taken by President Ramaphosa a few weeks ago to lead in the establishment of what is called the Hague Group. Presidents of different countries who have attached their names to being consistent in support for international law. And we need that kind of progressive leadership and the readiness to stand up and be counted. You can't change things if you stand in a corner. You need to be visible, to be available, and to be active. We also must, I believe, address the reform of the United Nations. It's urgently necessary. The United Nations Charter was drafted in 1948, and it was drafted at a time when we were mainly colonized as the African continent. And thus we were not figured into the character of the Charter. And there are elements that really work against us as nations of the South. So I think we now need to accelerate the processes for concrete action on reform of the United Nations. That will assist us. But we also must consistently point out to the powerful of the world that their exercise of international law and international law instruments reflects very deeply double standards. We shouldn't be afraid to say it. A journalist asking me a question in an interview in the UK said to me, you always speak about support and solidarity for the Palestinian people. And he said, and yet, you know, we as Germans, many of us supported South Africa in the struggle against apartheid as civil society formations. Why are you not supportive of the people of Ukraine? I said, no, I'm not against the people of Ukraine, but I don't see anybody giving arms to the people of Palestine. And you, although you supported our struggle, you didn't give us arms. So you practice a double standard, depending on color, on geography, on status. We believe all oppression must be addressed by each one of us in the world. And so in conclusion, I agree with the gentleman in the green t-shirt that indeed we must use our advantages, a stronger BRICS, a beneficiation of our minerals, which this province can play a very important role in, greater use of science, and particularly big data science because of SKA being in this province. This province should mark itself as a digital province because of the science capacity located here. That should be the key focus of this institution, that we look at digital skills, we look at science, we look at research, we look at computation, because this is the value that we have. And then, of course, mining, critically important, and manufacturing and industrial capacity with respect to minerals that are found in this province. And of course, ASEAN, huge population, great opportunity for increased trade. We've just 2 years ago become a dialogue partner of ASEAN, first African country to be admitted, and our business people just concluded an excellent trade deal with ASEAN countries of halal beef. So again, we have an industry, halal, that can make us internationally competitive, and we must use it as South Africans. On the de-dollarization, I think we should exercise good caution there, because you don't want to take a radical step and then find that in terms of sudden calls on debt repayments or drop in bond value and so on, you've harmed your economy. So this is why we are proceeding on the basis of investigating use of own currency for international trade. We don't use this term de-dollarization. You won't hear it from us at least, because we know that we want to move in a manner that will allow us to continue to have some control of our economy and not find ourselves landed with very deep demands that will cost huge resources from our public revenue. So that's the way in which we are proceeding. Our central bank governors, as well as our ministers of finance, have been charged by BRICS to develop the methodology and the international system to allow us for use of local currency, which we already do with the BRICS Bank, for example. So this is the area in which we're moving. Finally, I want to say to the President, Oliphant, of the university leadership, I was one of the first trustees of TEFSA, the precursor to NSFAS. It was called the Tertiary Education Fund for South Africa. We started with 1 million rand. Today, we're allocating 48 billion. So I think it's not appropriate to assert that we're not making progress. We are. It's not what we want it to be. And it will only be what we want it to be when we sufficiently grow our economy, when we ensure that we complete our studies on time, when we ensure that the academic areas we pursue are scarce skills areas that are a deep need, such as vocational and technical education. We need thousands of artisans in this country. We don't have enough because we regard it as low class. And yet we could be entrepreneurs. So we need to change our economic mindset and our skills mindset. Beyond that, I also think there is merit in investigating what exactly is the financial status of many of the families that send young people to our institutions. I think we fall harshly on the accusation that government is not doing enough, but we don't sufficiently examine the spending patterns of some of our families and lack of commitment to our responsibility. Remember something we haven't mentioned, you and I, and that is rights do not exist alone. Rights come with responsibility. And at times I think we are dishonest in the demands we make and are unfair on the expectation we sometimes have that the government can do everything. It's not possible. It's just not possible. What we do need is improved institutional capacity, a differentiation in financial institutions' contribution to a number of the social goals of our country as exists elsewhere, but then it's very uncomfortable to leave university with a huge debt in the United States of America as is practiced today. I think our system has tried to be fairer, but I also think that there are times when we do have this wastage of resources. Some of us stay at university too long. There are students who've become traditional students, been in university 5, 6, and so on years. We think it's okay. Some become wealthy through getting some of the NSFAS money. Others buy the best hi-fi system. You know, there's some things we've just got to stop. A society devoted to development has to have integrity in it. And integrity doesn't come just because you're an adult. All of us have to have integrity. There are some people who have a party every weekend and they can't contribute to buying books for their children. And yet they're drinking brandy and whiskey. This is disgraceful. And I'm not going to be dishonest and try and praise that kind of society. I think we need a hard look sometimes at ourselves. I'm not in any way one who claims the government does all that it can or should, but I am honest about ourselves and sometimes how we cause ourselves to fail.
Prof, I think you've covered quite a lot of those questions. I'll try and be brief. On the question of the position, the seeming timid position in response to what is coming out of the Trump government, I really am not envious of those who are seized with this responsibility. It's a very difficult place they find themselves in that if it was a conversation based on principles, it would be easy to explain the point of departure of South Africa with the expectation that that will be reckoned with. I don't get the sense that the pronouncements of the new administration in the US is about what makes sense. If you look at where countries like Canada or the EU, who call themselves allies, find themselves, it leaves me with a huge question as to whether or not there will ever be a productive outcome to any engagement. Yet, of course, the office of the president, and we haven't spoiled for a fight on this matter as South Africa, has to do what presidents and diplomats do. What I think is important, though, is that they need to hear what South Africa thinks about this matter, right? And it's important that we are emphatic. And the point of my message was that the US may be big on the economy, on money, on military might, but South Africa appears to be bigger on values. And so it is correct, when we talk of our national interests, we can't afford to have them not undergirded by a values-based consideration of our approach to the world. So I had that interview and I wasn't envious of where the presidency find themselves on this matter. But the reality is that we too as South African citizens need to come out. We need to articulate. It can be a very lonely place to lead in those kinds of matters. I cannot begin to imagine the personal trauma visited on Professor Pandor when she was the face of this matter, the matter of the ICJ, right? And we are best off were we to be audible as society in the manner and the tradition of our activism. We, after all, freed ourselves because we were collectively active. This brings me to the question of the youth and how they can actually engage. I think it's actually very scary that we find ourselves in a situation where, according to the last election, only 39% of the eligible voters turned up for elections. It says that somehow we have turned our back on democracy and we are dependent on young people. And you can see how this will happen. If you look, you do a dipstick and just assess where the channel that we used to rely on, which was the conduit of youth leadership, the youth formations. Look at where they are, the condition of those youth organizations, right? People are not showing up to attend, to help challenge their mother bodies on matters that relate to youth and so forth. And you see this in outcomes such as 39%. So effectively, our democracy as it stands is based on a minority mandate. Yet we must live with the outcomes. Now it tells us that we then have no reason to explain if those who are organized have organized themselves best. I think that one of the tools available to youth to organize themselves is right in our hands. We use it all the time to spread gossip. We have technology to organize ourselves. At the Steve Biko Foundation, we are currently working on a system we call Vanguard. And I was excited earlier to hear that there's a data science unit at the university. And what Vanguard does, is that it scrubs all of the reports of government at all layers. So whether it is the reports coming out of local government or provincial government or national government. And it does an assessment of where each unit of government sits in relation to the budget that was signed for the mandate of that particular year. And then it shows that up in a form of a dashboard. So the closest thing to it at the moment, if you follow elections, particularly elections in the US, what they do is, as the numbers come from the voting districts, they have plotted them on a map. And you can tap and look at a particular state or a particular, in our case, municipality sitting within a state to look at where the numbers are, right? And at some point, commentators are able to call an election. The weakness of that tool is that it's useful only for elections. And we are saying, in the period between elections, this government has now got power. Every year, they produce what is called, there's a report, the plan produced by government entities, which is a promise to the public, including budgets, right? Performance plan, right? You've got a basis there then to track how they are doing. And what it would enable us to do is, you don't wait for the end of the year or the end of or the next cycle of elections. You are able to say by June, Department of Human Settlement, your budget was 400, whatever it is. You've only spent 10% of that, which means you are underperforming, right? So that's one tool. There's a second one, which is also technology-based. It's a tool to monitor not just the attendance, but the voting patterns of those who are in parliament, right? Now, it's an example of how technology can empower youth. We are not quite there in completing these projects, but you can have at the palm of your hand a reading of your province, your municipality, how your elected official has voted on particular matters. And of course, that works only if you then will have a voice based on that. Professor Pandor is correct. There are all sorts of reports coming out of government, but we are so disconnected from them. We don't know how to substantively articulate our issues. So you will see something like 2,000 protests happening in South Africa, right, a year. When you say, what's happening, comrade? Labantu, they don't deliver. Okay, what have they not delivered? Yeah, no, Yazin. And that's the sum total. And we are trying to bring depth to that. Of course, those things are successful, particularly with young people who are more inclined to use technology. How does BC remain relevant? I think it's useful to us in two ways. One of the things that Black consciousness philosophy did and their practices was self-evaluation, right? One of my favorite articles in Biko's writings, contained in the book I Write What I Like, is an article which is called We Blacks, where he says, let's stop talking about white people. Let's just talk about ourselves, right? And coming out of that frank evaluation of self are tough truths. So if we apply that in the case referenced by Dr. Pandor, you will see that, for instance, if we were talking about NSFAS, in that self-evaluation, we would be saying, many of us are brought onto campus by poor families. It is unfortunate that we have to share even the little money that we get from NSFAS to feed people at home, right? But it goes beyond that. He then says, but how much of my money is going to Savannah, right? And you begin there to come out with solutions that are pointed at self. This is not preventing the second part, which is analyzing the situation out there and what is happening with government or what government is doing or not doing and all sorts of other spheres of our lives. And I think that it's a very useful approach to how we view ourselves so that we are able to create total solutions rather than, if you like, convenient solutions. And then there was a question about human rights, culture, fit for purpose, and so forth. Look, there was a wise statement that was, I think, articulated by Michelle Obama, who said we should not agonize, we must organize, right? Do not agonize, she says, organize. And I think that we, of course, have the tool of the Constitution to enforce those rights that we should indeed, I mean, take the issue for me, which is unforgivable, of poverty, right? In a country that has got resources. Its primary issue is not the resources, it's the distribution of resources. And how can we better deal with that, right? But I think going beyond the courts, our own activism, linked to my last point, can be a part of enforcing a new way of driving the case for human rights. So take this example. It behooves me to think that an African Forum has not quite thought through the consequences of their actions for the following reason. It's a membership-driven organization. Many of their members are business owners. If South Africans were to simply say, okay, we hear you, right? But what we will do is, now that you are asking for sanctions to be visited upon our country or certain sections of our country, we will collectively regard you as not progressive. And of course, we have an old tool called consumer boycotts. And I'm telling you, judging from what happened recently with COVID, when the president says you can't step out of your house for health reasons, what happened during that period? Companies, big companies, the likes of ShopRite and others, in 3 months they were on their knees begging government for support because they are beneficiaries of the small monies that we collectively bring. So we have to perhaps step beyond begging for change in this country and enforcing change using some of the tools that we had. We don't own the means of production yet, but our collective buying power can determine change in this country, right? And so I think that I will leave it at that. The last thing I did want to touch on, I am not a woman. There was a question asked about women leadership issues. But here is a reality. And we were reminded of this in a conversation with Dr. Nkosazana Zuma some years back. I think it was when she gave one of the Biko lectures. She said, at the time there were 7 billion, but now there are 8 billion people in the world, right? There are 4 billion women, and then there are 4 billion people born of women, right? So each one of us that are sitting here are heavily indebted to women, right? It's true, we are seeing some progress in the representation of women, certainly in the political space. We are far from it, in my view, in the economic leadership. Even in the political space, we should not be at a point where the ruling party, a party whose age now is around 112 or thereabout, has not ever had a woman president. It can't be, right? And so we must be unapologetic. I'm a product of a hard-working woman, Nontsigelelo Biko, and she, together with my grandmother, who was equally hardworking, who was working as a domestic assistant at the local hospital, they literally brought up that entire family of ours. My grandfather died in 1950. My father was 4. My father died in 1977. I was 6. So we are a family produced of women. So my perspective is, having watched her drive 300 a better place for women like her and the many mothers who have brought us here, some of them sitting in a rank somewhere selling apples. We ought to see a better representation for them in our society.
Thank you. I just quickly want to respond to the question on nursing. We are extremely happy that you want to join. Unfortunately, it takes a while to set up a faculty. What we can do this year, we will have our curriculum fully written, but then it takes about 2 to 3 years to get it accredited. And so we are working on our faculty of health science, but taking in students is probably going to take about 4 to 5 years before we can take in students. So I encourage you to complete your ICT qualification and then come back to join us for a degree in nursing so you can eventually run a hospital. Thank you.
All right. I got a question regarding accountability and civil society involvement, with particular regards to holding government accountable. You know, I want to tell you that this boils down to what we call, in my discipline, political culture. All right? In 1994, we had what is called polyac. With the inauguration of the new government in 1994, there was democracy. There was a hype of activities politically. Civil society organizations, political organizations were very active. But as time went on, the problem that crept in was apathy, political apathy. Just like Mr. Biko here says, only 39% of people voted. What is that? It's apathy. So, to improve accountability in a country, you need to have active mobilization of civil society organizations. And these civil society organizations must be issue-based. If you have got a civil society organization that deals with water quality, let it be active. Let it be active in the furtherance of their water quality agenda. If we've got a movement of cattle owners, Black Cattle Owners Association in KZN, let it push for agriculture. Civil society organizations should be issue-based and they should not be apologetic. Right? So, all that is called a responsive political culture. We need to have a responsive political culture currently in the country. People must stop being apathetic. We don't need to have emotional voting. We need to have what we call scientific voting. You vote on the basis of what are the deliverables of a political party that you belong to. What does it deliver? You know, what about allocative efficiency? What about distributive efficiency? What about transformative efficiency? If you see these characteristics since 1994 in a particular organization, why not go and make your vote? Because when you vote, you are putting people into power. And when you don't vote, you are also taking people out of power. But when you don't vote completely, you are weakening the political system. In other words, you're driving the political system into an apathetic political system, which does not help us in terms of civil society participation, political participation of civilians in the country. So I think to answer your question, we need to have a paradigm shift from an apathetic political culture to a responsive political culture. Citizens must participate in the politics of their country. There is no time to be apathetic, because if you are apathetic, if I were to go to Mr. Biko here, AfriForum is an organization which is member-driven, and there are around 350,000, right? Now imagine a population of more than a voting population of more than 20 million people. If you are really going to say we are going to vote, definitely you will change the accountability trajectory in the country. You will change the political architecture in the country. If you don't vote, you are destroying human rights. Voting is part of human rights. You go and enshrine your vote to a political party that you think it's going to enhance efficient service delivery and allocation of resources in a country, hence reduction of poverty, unemployment, and landlessness. So you ought to go and vote. Let's change the political trajectory of voting into responsive political culture. Thank you.
Thank you. I think our keynote speakers. Our keynote speakers did not just answer the questions, but they also addressed very important matters. So unfortunately, due to being over time, we can't take the next round of questions. Sorry. So allow me to hand over to our senior manager, Mr. Mnyaka, to do the closing. Thank you.
It's very difficult to stand between the politics of food and saying thank you. I promise I won't be long. The brief I received that I've got 5 minutes, I'll take literally 3 minutes. But I think it's important to sum up the discussion. And that's important because when you have dialogues and engagements, it's important that you follow what they call a golden thread to take the conversation further from here and have it in your own spaces. Because it's not about just sitting, talking, and engaging, and then it stops there. The first fundamental thing is about how do you change your own environment? How do you become this critically engaged individual who within their own space, starting with their own floor rep, moving on to their house committee, moving on to the various leadership structures that are in the institution, how do we ensure we hold these various leaders accountable? But also to recognize and understand that what is important first is self-leadership, to be able to lead yourself before you lead others. Because the challenge that happens with that is that we're very quick to want others to take responsibility, but we don't allow ourselves to take responsibility for our own actions. With that, I would like to thank our speakers for coming all the way to the Northern Cape in Kimberley. I would like to start by acknowledging the Dean of Students in her absence. And I would like to say these types of engagements are engagements that the Division of Student Affairs seeks to continue in having in various forms and shapes so that we develop what we call holistic students. Not only a person who understands ICT, but understands the grasping of society and how their qualifications relate to the broader society. And also, I want to thank and acknowledge, as I said, Dr. Pandor and Mr. Biko for accepting the invitation. This discussion has been long going. It started in October last year to try and have both speakers in our midst. And I want to share and thank the various organizers, to thank the Northern Cape government, particularly the Department of Arts and Culture, for partnering with us in these opportunities. And there are others that will happen of this nature. I want to also acknowledge the LOC that assisted, which consists of a number of different departments and divisions within the institution, namely the Division of Student Affairs, Campus Security, Property Management, Facilities, and the Service Department, Library, and Institutional Advancement. Then I also want to thank the community for coming out and really allowing Salt Blight University to be part of the community and being part of our engagements to really grow our institution, as we are not seeking to be a university that's an ivory tower, but to be one with the community. And lastly, I want to also thank the students, one, for waking up early and coming through and being patient and listening. I hope you've taken something and you'll have a discussion. And I hope to what Mr. Vigo said, one will really introspect and see in terms of these allowances, what really goes where at what point. And then just to make some announcements, I would like to call, before the announcements, if I could ask Mr. Shikwambana to just come up with the gifts, and then I'll ask Prof. Mayor if you could hand over some tokens of appreciation to our panelists. They'll come around this way. Okay. As the VC would normally say, what is important is the package, because in a few years it will be worth a lot. In fact, it's worth a lot now. You must preserve it and honor it. Then when we close, the panelists and the invited guests will be ushered in, I think, by Mr. Adonis to somewhere. And then the announcement that I've received is that pertaining to everyone else, the students in particular, is to remain seated. Asmami, am I correct? Is to remain seated, and then there will be a distribution of the packages that are there in that relation. And then, and then as I close, I think the cameraman, if you can assist us to have a picture in front with the prof and the panelists to close that matter. Otherwise, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of Human Rights Day. It was a pleasure having you.